Have you ever noticed that healing rarely feels like healing? It doesn't arrive as fireworks or sudden enlightenment. It sneaks in, quietly, humbly, disguised as ordinary moments you barely notice. You think you're still broken because your heart still remembers the weight of what happened. But healing isn't about forgetting pain. It's about no longer being ruled by it. It's in that pause before you react. It's in the moment you choose silence instead of explanation. It's in the day you wake up and realize that the things that once consumed you now feel strangely distant, like echoes from another life. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Healing is exactly that, not a performance of happiness, but a reconciliation with your own shadows. You stop fighting your sadness. You stop pretending to be invincible. And in that surrender, something astonishing happens. You start becoming whole. Healing is not a finish line. It's the quiet unfolding of awareness. And maybe, just maybe, you've healed more than you realize. Sign 1. You no longer need to be understood. Once, your peace depended on others' validation. If they misunderstood you, it felt like a kind of death. You wanted to be seen, heard, known. To have someone finally say, "Yes, I understand." But now, something inside you has softened. You no longer chase understanding as proof of existence. You've learned that not everyone can meet you at your depth. And that's no longer painful, it's peaceful. You've stopped over-explaining your intentions. You've stopped defending your emotions to those who misinterpret them. You've learned that silence is not weakness. It's wisdom disguised as restraint. Jung believed that much of our suffering comes from identification, from mistaking what others think of us for who we are. When you detach from that illusion, you reclaim your selfhood. You've realized you don't need to be understood to live truthfully. You don't need to be seen to exist authentically. You can stand quietly in your truth, and that is power. This is not isolation. It's self-containment, the ability to hold your own energy without spilling it in every direction. That shift, from needing validation to embodying self-trust, is one of the clearest signs that healing has already begun its sacred work. Sign 2. You respond instead of react. There was a time when every little thing felt personal. A word, a glance, a delay, they could unravel you. You didn't know it then, but you were living from your wounds, not your wisdom. Now you've learned the art of the pause. Before reacting, you breathe. You observe your emotions rise. But instead of drowning in them, you witness them. That small space, the moment between trigger and choice, is consciousness being born. Jung described this as individuation, the gradual awakening of the self beyond its unconscious reactions. You no longer let every wave drag you into its depth. You stand at the shore, feeling the current, but remaining grounded. This doesn't mean you've become cold or detached. It means you've grown gentle, with yourself, with others, with life. You understand now that not every action requires a counteraction. Not every chaos needs your participation. And not every pain is an invitation to reopen old wounds. Healing is not the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of energy. You've learned to hold fire without being burned by it. That is power. That is freedom. Sign 3. You've stopped romanticizing chaos. There was a time when peace felt unnatural. You were so used to pain that calm felt suspicious, as if life was too quiet, too good, too still. You mistook intensity for love. You equated chaos with meaning. You thought the louder the emotion, the deeper the bond. But you've grown wiser now. You've realized that storms don't prove depth. They prove imbalance. You've stopped craving the people who make you anxious and calling it passion. You've stopped believing that love should hurt to be real. Now peace feels like home. You're learning that consistency, kindness, and presence are not boring, they're sacred. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Once you called your patterns destiny. Now you call them lessons. You no longer chase what breaks you. You no longer confuse adrenaline with aliveness. You've stopped being addicted to emotional drama because you've tasted the stillness of genuine peace, and you'd rather stay there. That is a profound sign of healing, when calm finally feels natural. Sign 4. You forgive without reopening the door. Forgiveness used to mean reconciliation. It meant keeping the door open, inviting the same story to repeat itself under a different name. But now you understand something deeper. Forgiveness is not for them, it's for you. It's the release of energy that was never yours to carry. It's choosing lightness over bitterness, acceptance over resentment. You can forgive without explaining. You can release without returning. You can close the chapter and still wish them well. Jung wrote that the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. And through that narrow door of pain, you found something unexpected, compassion. Not the naive kind that excuses everything, but the wise kind that understands everything and still chooses peace. You've realized that forgiveness isn't approval, it's liberation. It's saying, what happened no longer defines me. And with that, the past loses its hold. You are free, not because the story ended perfectly, but because you chose to stop rereading it. Sign 5. You're comfortable in stillness. Once, silence was unbearable. You needed noise, movement, distraction, anything to drown out the thoughts echoing inside your head. The quiet made you anxious because it mirrored everything you hadn't faced. But now, you can sit in stillness and feel safe. You can be alone without being lonely. You've learned that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers that words could never give. Jung believed that solitude is for the few. He didn't mean isolation. He meant the courage to meet yourself without disguise. And you've done that. You've faced the parts of you that were uncomfortable, fragile, even dark. And instead of running, you listened. In stillness, you found your rhythm again. You've realized that constant motion was just another form of avoidance, and that real growth happens in the quiet moments between doing and becoming. Healing isn't loud. It's subtle, like breath, like dawn, like the gentle returning of light after a long night. You've made peace with the pause. You no longer mistake stillness for stagnation, and that is one of the purest signs of emotional maturity. Sign 6. You don't fear endings anymore. There was a time when every ending felt like death. The end of a friendship, a chapter, a love. It would shatter you because you built your sense of self on what you had, not who you were. But now you view endings differently. You've seen enough cycles of life to know that what leaves you is often what was meant to. You no longer beg people to stay. You no longer cling to what's fading. Instead, you bow to the rhythm of impermanence, understanding that closure isn't something you find, it's something you create. Jung once said, "We must be able to let things go. For the soul to rise, certain attachments must fall." And that's what you've done. You've released with grace. You see now that every ending is a hidden beginning, that every loss refines the shape of your soul. You still feel pain, of course you do, but you no longer resist it. You allow it to pass through you, knowing that grief itself is sacred. It's proof that you loved deeply and lived fully. This acceptance, this trust in life's unfolding, is not detachment. It's wisdom disguised as serenity. Sign 7. You see patterns, not people, as the problem. Once it was easy to point outward, to blame circumstances, partners, friends, the world itself. But healing turns the mirror inward. Now, when something hurts, you don't just ask, "Why did they do that?" You ask, "What part of me accepted it?" Not in self-blame, but in self-inquiry. You see patterns instead of villains. You recognize cycles instead of coincidences. You understand that every painful repetition was your psyche's way of asking to be seen. Jung taught that the unconscious will continue to project itself onto others until it is made conscious within. And you've started to see that. The same energy appearing in different faces, the same wound repeating until it became your teacher. Now, you no longer take everything personally. You approach life like an observer, curious, compassionate, awake. You can say, "This pattern is familiar, but I don't need to dance with it again." That is awareness. That is healing becoming wisdom. Sign 8. You've made peace with the past. Healing doesn't erase your story. It reframes it. The things that once haunted you now feel like teachers, not because they were good, but because they revealed your strength. You no longer see your younger self as weak or foolish. You see them as brave, someone who survived so you could become this version of you. You've stopped trying to change what happened. Instead, you've started integrating it, holding your past gently, like a photograph of someone you finally understand. Jung said that what you resist persists, and you've learned that peace comes not from fighting your story, but from accepting it fully. You may still feel sorrow when memories return, but that sorrow no longer consumes you. It simply passes through like weather over a calm sea. That is what real healing looks like. Not perfection, but perspective. You've turned your pain into wisdom, your wounds into insight, and your silence into song. The closing reflection. Healing, you see, is not a destination. It's not a finish line you cross with applause waiting on the other side. It's a returning, a quiet homecoming to yourself, to wholeness, to that unbroken core that has always been there beneath the noise of life. You start noticing it in small, almost invisible ways. The song that once tore you apart now just sounds beautiful. You drive past the place that used to hurt, and instead of tightening your chest, you simply notice the sky. You no longer chase love, peace, or purpose outside yourself. You carry them quietly now, like a small flame glowing steady in your chest. A flame that doesn't need to be seen to exist. You don't need someone to complete you anymore. You don't need the world to validate your worth. You wake up in the morning and your peace doesn't depend on a text message, a job title, or how much the world claps for you. You've become rooted in something deeper, something the noise can't touch. Carl Jung believed that every human journey moves toward individuation, the integration of all our parts into a single, harmonious self. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. And maybe that's where you are now. Not fully complete, but profoundly aware. You've made friends with your contradictions. You've learned to hold both joy and sorrow in the same breath, without tearing yourself apart. You are the observer and the observed, the wound and the healer, the shadow and the light. You've stopped trying to eliminate your pain. You've learned to understand it. You no longer hide your scars. You wear them as reminders that you survived. Your healing was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who you've always been, before the world told you who you should be. And if you've ever wondered whether you've healed, don't look for fireworks. Look for quiet moments, like the day you didn't overthink that message, the evening you didn't replay an old argument, the night you slept peacefully knowing not everything needs closure. Look at your peace. Look at your stillness. Look at the way you love now, gently, without needing to be understood. Look at how easily you let go, not because you don't care, but because you've learned that peace is worth more than proof. Look at how you can sit alone, in a quiet room, with no noise to distract you, and feel safe. That is not loneliness, that is return. You've healed more than you realize, and the universe, in its quiet wisdom, is already reflecting that back to you. Through the calmness in your voice, through the ease in your breath, through the softness that has replaced the old defenses. You are living proof that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply exhales and says, I'm home.